Tina semdol kake mofaseda.
Welcome to Talking in Stations. I am Matterall. Well, today we have the CSM Summit that has occurred in minutes that have covered what was said there. So we're going to go over that. That's the majority of this show. To do that, we're going to welcome our panel and one guest. We'll start with Dirk McGurk.
Hey, what's up? It's Dirk McGurk from Crusaders and Tactical Narcotics team and co-host of the Open Com Show.
Kaskora.
Hi all, this is Kaskora Yari, CEO of Ember Sands and resident wormholer.
And a welcome back to a long-lost friend, Ashtarothi, who's joining us again.
Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, commander of FedUp, and it is really good to be back. I've got my Lacrimix ready to go, and let's have a show.
Let's have a show indeed. Our guest today is a CSM member from Goon Swarm Federation, Aerith.
Hello.
All right, let's dig in. But actually, before we start, we're going to take care of a little bit of news business. And the first thing is that a Keepstar that was actually defended by people, and that would be Triumvirate, yeah, probably Triumvirate 7, if I'm not mistaken, because they have constituted and dissipated 6 times before this one, lost their Keepstar and look like they are on the run as their home region is getting burned down by their enemies, the Drone Region Federation. Dirk, you actually covered that live. What was that like?
It was slow. It started off pretty well until fighters got launched and that sort of thing. But you know, obviously it was, I don't know, 6 hours of going back and forth, you know, with slow tie-dye conditions once again. However, not slow to the point of 9-TAC-4. They were actually able to make things happen. There were fleets moving around doing what they do. I don't know. I mean, yeah, overall it worked. You know, as opposed to 9-TAC-4, and the Keepstar died. You know, sadly, our coverage missed the money shot at the end when something happened with the camera, and we missed the big shiny explosion. But overall, the Triumvirate went down.
Well, the thing that went wrong was the graphics didn't render to the camera. The camera didn't move and get screwed up, right?
Correct.
It's just yeah. So that, you know, other people also missed it. But yeah, our camera missed it. We'll continue to do coverage like that for INN, bringing in some experts that can talk about actually what's going on down there, and also try to get better camera work. And not that it's bad, but it just needs to be cleaned up with a better interface and stuff so people can understand what's actually going on, because that's what people are tuning in for. I mean, it moves so slow that you should be able to like watch coverage and know what's going on as soon as you get there. It's a snail's pace. Even this one.
What I was watching that coverage, and I was thinking that you guys, there are tools that you can get so you can like literally draw on the screen, and it may be that you guys need to do like a football style playoff of like X's and O's, and these people are moving in this direction to help conceptualize it for the people that are just like looking in and seeing a snapshot of what's happening.
Yeah,
in a non-tie-dye situation, adding some of those things could absolutely make sense. The problem is that the camera that's there is also in that tie-dye situation, right? And the more that person begins to add load locally, right? The last thing we want to do is lose the stream, right? Which we actually did, I think, one time there when he disconnected.
But there's a way to do that. You can actually have one person running a camera, broadcast that to a signal, and pick up that signal on a different computer, even a different person. And that way you take the load off. You know, one person can worry about making sure the camera is up at all times, and then the other guy can actually broadcast, and you can have him have the technology that scribbles on it and stuff like that. There is a way. This is all new. It's a whole wild west of streaming, but there are definitely ways, and we're going to try to figure out how to do that.
Can I tangent just real quickly on this for just a second?
Sure.
Because I think that this is important. As you mentioned, there was another battle with the Keepstar a few weeks earlier, which a lot of people considered to be a technical failure, that the system basically wasn't able to support it in such a way, and so it didn't. The simulation didn't come through. So there's a lot of questions about how these fights on these Keepstars are going to go, especially as numbers continue to climb and as we continue to crush the server with these fights. You're not going to have a small Keepstar fight. But here is the key. The more often we are operating, the more common these extreme situations become, the better everybody's going to get at dealing with it. CCP is going to get better at identifying bugs that are causing serious problems that are in tie-dye. We're going to get better at covering it. And so as these things become more commonplace, we're going to just get better at handling them.
Right. As they become a priority too. I think you need to figure out if it's something that you want to do. Are people interested in watching wars go live and stuff like that? Because I made the proposition, probably erroneously, that people would like to know if there's a big fight happening. People would like to know if there's like state of the alliance. It doesn't just have to be big battles or even a move op. That's where I got a lot of resistance, but I think a move op would be really impressive. And I've talked to FC friends that are coalition leaders, and they're like, I wouldn't mind if my move op was, all the conditions being, correct. I wouldn't mind if a move op was broadcast because it's, a good recruiting tool. All right. So that was that. That's what's going on in the world of war in EVE right now. But we're going to move on to...
and if I can just follow up, I mean, we did talk a lot about camera angles there and like what worked and what didn't work. And that probably took up a lot of bandwidth. But what we did have there, number one, was we had what seems to be the tried and true, trebuchet method of launching fighters from 1,000 kilometers away, right? But you also had pandemic horde, fleets that were there that were applying DPS. Tri was fighting back in what appeared to be a reasonably well outnumbered, type of situation, but they did fight. Now, what are we hearing is the aftermath of this? That Keepstar died. What has happened subsequent to that? You were mentioning something to me the other day about it looked like the entire Innsmouth region was on fire.
Yeah, I think they reinforced a lot of it all at once. You can look on eve.land to see like how bad the damage was, but they're definitely making an attempt to just eat up all that land that they is now undefended, basically.
Yep. So that's something that probably needs to be watched for in the coming days and weeks. Was that basically the final stand for Triumvirate in Innsmouth, not Triumvirate as an entity, but are they taking that as a signal of eviction, basically?
Yeah. Well, we'll watch that. Also, we had a couple of Titans get baited, I believe, and killed, or maybe they were bait. I was unclear by the person who owned one of the Titans when he told me what happened. Those were killed by Goon Swarm. Anybody know anything about that? Test Titans killed by Goon Swarm is a little interesting politically. Can someone tell me why?
Because we made them have to take down their structures, and now they're getting a little just the tip.
Okay, well, can you tell me why differently? Yeah, so it's interesting because you're supposed to be Aerith from Goonswarm. You're supposed to be allies, sort of. But
what? No, whoa. I would not use the term allies. Like, allies has a very specific meaning to us. They're not allies.
Okay, they're not allies, so they're not within protection banner.
No, not
but
at all.
they were right. But they were people you kind of worked with, or not.
I wouldn't even say that much. More like people we have a non-invasion pact with, just to kind of keep things semi-stable in the south. But anything beyond that is never really existed. FC level people will try to like, hey, I want to come to this fight. Do you have enough numbers? Is it going to be uneven? I'll show up. Like, FCs do some stuff like that all the time to set up fights, but beyond that, no.
Okay, so it's interesting because here's how it works in the grand scheme of EVE Online. You have basically two powers on two sides. You have multiple powers. You have three powers if you look at it a different way. But there's two major powers of the EVE Online narrative, which have been, they go all the way back to 2008, 2006 to 2008.
Clemente and the Caldari.
No, that's in the game with lore, but who pays attention to that? So you have like Bob and you have Goons, and these are the two forces that kind of shaped EVE Online around 2008. And the remnants of Bob have been scattered through basically PL and definitely now in CDOT, who owns a lot of the same players, the old players that played there. And you still have a Goon Swarm that is stronger than it's ever been, let's say. So that's, we're talking 10 years of rivalry and stuff. But right now, as you saw in 9TAC4, the conventional Bob forces, when they put together, all the allies and everybody else, is as big, if not bigger, than all of the Imperium, which is Goon Swarm's group. You saw them collide in 9TAC4, and that's why that was such a big fight, because it brings back all that rivalry, and it brings back all that motivation to destroy one another. The counterweight to that is this test group, which is very big and now super capital heavy too. And where will they put their loyalties? Because during the Casino War, they sided with the North and helped evict the Imperium. But after that, they were evicted themselves by the group that evicted the Imperium. So where do they sit? Where's their loyalty?
This is really easy. Like, if you want to understand test, they are the biggest fair weather pricks ever. Like, they will go to whatever side they think is going to win at the moment that they can take advantage of. That's how you understand test. There's nothing beyond that.
Right. So if they help the Imperium against the North, that's because they see that as a benefit. Or if they help the North against you, it's because they see that as the...
Yeah, like, there is no loyalty to anyone. Like, you can never trust test. It's like trusting certain people in the North. You can never trust them because they don't keep their word.
Now, what makes it interesting, though, is you have, and this is very interesting, you have their two major fleet commanders. One has always been an enemy to Goon Swarm, and one was in Goon Swarm.
Yeah, I suppose. Like, it's more a schizophrenic kind of organization in that regard, but at the end of the day, any one person like that isn't one deciding, geopolitics, right? And we've learned a long time ago that test leadership, their current leadership, this includes Sapporo, they cannot be trusted. They seem to be trying to keep treaties now or somewhat agreements, but that's a really new development.
Yeah.
I think
well,
one
it's
of the
interesting.
problems is that Test would disagree with you that there's the two power bases, right? Like, they fundamentally view the power blocks differently than the Imperium Bob.
Yeah, that was an explain like I'm 5 effort of giving people, 10 years of history in EVE. But
it's really simple. The only two things that matter in the meta right now are what NC does and what we do. Like, those are the only two apex forces right now.
Yeah. All right.
I didn't say PL because PL now is second. They're kind of bottom bitch to NC.
Well, I can't comment. I can't comment on that. Let's. I am an NC, and I in the past haven't liked PL very much for different reasons, for cultural reasons. Although I like some PL members very much. But anyway, let's move on. Dirk, are you finished with this topic?
I haven't spoken in 5 minutes.
Your eyes tell me you haven't finished. All right.
Oh, no, I'm looking at other things here. Other people had other things to say. I mean, I knew where it was going to. I kind of knew where that was going to end up going down, right? I mean, because you can go back to, I think it was when Aerith came on the 9TAC4 coverage, right? And I think they got into a whole thing there about because of Fortizar.
So Aerith, the part 2 of that is you did make them take down the stations they put up.
Yeah. It was either that or we were going to hit them. So pick one.
All right, yeah. So let's move on. Do you have anything, Keskora? Do you have anything from Wormhole Space that's going on? Because there's a lot of activity there.
Oh,
no, is
nothing super crazy noteworthy. I mean, lots of fights happening everywhere. It's still been pretty active. We've been seeing a lot of groups out and about, moving around, so that's always good. So hopefully we'll, keep seeing the trends from last month and this month.
And Ashtarothi and Faction War, anything going on there that's interesting?
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy. I published an article a week ago called Oix Marks the Spot, and then one of our guys published an article whose name I can't think of off the top of my head, or the article's name I can't think of, on Imperium about the same subject. So Fed Up, who is the Gallente force, has been, and actually a lot of the Gallente forces have been divided our attention between Cloud Ring in nullsec and the actual faction warfare war zone. But we've recently returned. We did a strike into OICX, which is just into Caldari territory. It was successful. During that same time, there was a push against Tama by Ardraw, so that was successful. So the Gallente made 2 pretty key victories over the last week or so, and the state has become angry. So it looks like in order to try to there seems to be a feint at the moment. They're wanting to get back at OICX, so they're actually putting pressure onto Hades, which is right next to our capital staging system, or sorry, our capital system, like not our system for capitals, but the system in which we base out of.
Base.
Hades is right next door. They're threatening it, so that way we're having to pull back our pressure, so that way they can try to rescue OICX. So that's basically where we're at right now with faction war.
Now, real quick, and we won't spend too much time on this, but Caldari won the faction war first. They conquered all the stations or whatever. And then
years ago.
And Gallente has been fighting back and winning pretty much the rest of the time, right? Until recently.
So right around the Inferno expansion, there was a second change to faction warfare. And to not go into too many details, the short of it was it went from an offensively driven focus to a defensively driven focus. And it just so happened that during that time, the Gallente managed to pull the reins just enough to be able to hold most of the systems when that transfer happened. And since then, the state has been kind of on a back heel. There has been a couple of really good resurgences. And in fact, a year ago, we thought that the state was going to just burn the Gallente altogether. But we managed to save the South, and now it's basically South versus North.
Yeah, the state is the Caldari, and Gallente are the Republic, right?
Federation,
yeah.
Mimitar Republic and Amar Empire.
All right, cool. Thanks for that report. All right.
Well, I'd like to thank Keskora and Ashtarothi for their comments on faction warfare and wormholes, since we're now going to be covering the minutes, and those will never come up again.
Ever.
They didn't come up at the summit either.
Yeah, I mean, why focus anything in the game on people who are only 10% of the population, right?
I don't know.
Now you know how we feel.
There's a lot of, well, I won't go into it. Okay, so minutes. So this happens twice a year. These are the minutes for, I guess it would be Winter Summit.
Yeah.
Am I wrong about that?
Winter,
All right.
Yeah, that's what we call
It's
it.
not the summer.
It
It's
is
definitely
winter,
not the summer,
yes.
right? Yeah. It's California. What do you want? It's always summer here.
Although I believe that there is a quote in there somewhere that Sort Dragon said it's the summer.
Okay, we'll get into that in a second. Okay, so to set it up, the CSM Council of Stellar Management has a meeting twice a year. The winter one is usually the bigger one, I believe, and they all fly to Iceland, all but 2 this time, and have a conference over 4 days over the game, its pathway, which way is it going, what do they want to see developed, and because they're part consultant group and part focus group, they are also told stuff that's going to happen, and they get to comment on it and talk about why it will or won't work, and basically represent the players. So this is a representative body of the players to the company that makes the game, so that we make it together. The result of that are CSM minutes, which are published months later, and they have just come out. And we've read through all 77 pages several times. I myself am doing a special reading with Eve University's Seamus Donahue, and he's reading it, the entire thing, and I am recording
Book on tape, baby.
Yep, it's going to be a book on tape. So if you haven't read the minutes, don't worry. We got you covered. Talking in Stations will release a whole recording of the entire minutes so you can listen to it while you drive for your vacations.
You should get the guy from the Eve Reader podcast.
No, Seamus is an amazing reader. He actually breaks out all the... He breaks out all the acronyms. I mean, it's great. He refers to CCP as Crowd Control Productions. And it's just, he's complete. He's a very complete guy. So we're happy to have him do that.
But does he have like a really hot accent? That's what I'm interested in.
I don't know.
You tell us.
Hard for me to judge. Yeah, you tell us. All right, so that's coming soon. But if you want to get an analysis of those minutes, it's what we're going to do today. But you can also see the last episode of Open Comms, where Sort Dragon appeared and said something, many things, right, Dirk?
No,
as the host of Open Comms.
No, I mean he came on and was additive to the conversation. I think one of the best things. I think one of the best things to do for kind of, for the media, right, is to sort of review and boil these down a bit, for the listeners, like we do with everything else. But having somebody from the CSM who was there that can provide sort of context and background that is obviously missing in the minutes, right? And I think Sort was helpful with that the other night.
Yeah, and Aerith will be helpful to that today. So It's good. I think we have two very prominent CSM members. Well, actually, Aerith's a very prominent CSM member. Sort is the newest CSM member that came aboard halfway through this, but he's been a CSM previously. The issue is that, and one of the reasons we had Sort on Open Comms was because he spoke 50% of the time, or let me correct that, he was recorded as speaking 50% of the time, as much as everybody else combined.
Well, hold on. And let's just get what we mean there correct. His name was mentioned 48% of the time in the minutes, right? So out of all of the mentions of any CSM member's name being in there, his was 48%, which obviously dwarfed everybody else. The lowest one, I think, was Reload with 6 mentions, and then other people were somewhere between that, and I think Aerith was number 2, I think, with like 45 or 50 mentions.
What was one of Reload's questions?
Something about
standings.
Standings. Didn't seem that he knew how standings went from alliance to corp to individual.
Okay,
but that's why again, we're talking about mentions here. So when people say spoke 48% of the time, that would seem to indicate something else. Although there's anecdotal information that not only did he have that many mentions, but that he spoke quite a bit as well. But the minute I'm going to be honest with some of the bitching and moaning out there about how much Sort may have said or Sort may have asked in these things. If you're an outsider reading these minutes, right? You're sitting there wondering one of two things, is that guy the hardest working man in the room? Or did he somehow dominate a conversation amongst a group of people who are generally type A personalities that can each one of them dominate the conversation themselves if they chose to do that?
Jesus Christ, that analysis is just fucking terrible. First of all, I'm the only other type A on the entire CSM. Yeah. Second of all, a lot of shit did not make it to the notes. I am shocked by how much shit didn't make it to the notes this time. It's probably the most redacted set of notes I've ever seen. Wow. Yes, he talked a lot in sessions that were inconsequential because his stuff wouldn't get redacted. But I would say the signal to noise ratio was probably not in his favor. One of the things about being in the CSM and being in the room is you want to give insightful, reasoned feedback, and you don't necessarily just want to ask for a bunch of things that suit your play style. And I'm not saying he's bad at that, but I would say he definitely exhibited a lot of that behavior.
So then, who else would you say contributed a lot then? Who are we not seeing represented that you feel like really did stand out?
You're not seeing a few entire sessions, it looks like, where the entire CSM was heavily engaged, or I know a nominate was heavily engaged. My engagement looks high. I was engaged on all of them, but I was far more vociferous in some of the other sessions that aren't there. There were some things presented to us that were extremely disturbing that got heated, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, by and large, these minutes basically are what seems to be, anyways, okay? Who initiated a question and then an answer, but it gives nothing about, other CSM members may have been chiming in with agreement or disagreement to that. It doesn't kind of broaden out the conversation. It just sort of encapsulates a very small piece of it.
To ask the question a different way, if the argument is that Sort was overrepresented by the minutes, can you mention anybody that you think was particularly underrepresented underrepresented by the minutes?
I would say in general, this has been consistent. Steve tends to not make it to the minutes as much as he talks. I think because of what he brings up is so dry in I guess subject matter that he's often underrepresented for sure. And Jintan, I think, was a little underrepresented this time. He contributed a lot more than I thought he would from over the phone and not being in a lot of sessions due to his exams or whatever.
Yeah, he wanted to see new players have gladiator fights at the end of their tutorial session. That was pretty funny. Okay. But the reason that's important is there is this idea that we have a hard time voting on people because there's such a I guess, black box onto what people are actually contributing. So we don't know if the people we're electing are the right people or they're doing a good job or anything like that. So if you can figure out how to get yourself into the minutes, it looks like you're really busy. And that's what some of the, I guess.
But then why weren't people bitching about me the last 3 summits, you know, or last couple summits? I don't know.
And that's a good point. Why weren't people mad? I don't know. Well, I don't know. CSM members probably didn't immediately say, hey, this guy talked too much, didn't leave oxygen in the room for other people.
I can actually, as an outside perspective, I can answer that question. Aerith, you're considered the Goonswarm candidate. So I don't even think that's like you're judged in the same sort of way because it's just you're a foregone conclusion. Nobody wants to think about whether or not you're a good CSM member because you're just going to be on the CSM. If you
really thought about it like that, I guess.
Well, I would, in another way though, like, I mean, I'm a wormholer, so we have like our quote wormhole candidate in Noobman. And for me, I feel like CSM members in a lot of ways are effective based on how much they then communicate with their said community. Like a thing went for like Sugar Kyle when she was a CSM. She was so active and communicating with the community that when it came to the minutes, like I didn't even pay attention to how often she was mentioned because I know how much work she was doing by how much she communicated with the players. And to me, that's more important, like seeing that connection as opposed to just being like, oh, cool, they go to Iceland and they talk to the devs. Like that doesn't affect me at all. Like I don't, you know. So for me, like I feel like Newman's been a great CSM member because he takes the time to communicate with the rest of the wormholers that got him elected. So that's kind of my thought.
I would say from the inside, Newman is extremely effective on the CSM for the wormhole community. He comes with tons of data, tons of reasoned arguments right out of the gate. CCP pretty much always listens. He might not get what he wants just because they don't want to do it, but they always listen to his ideas. They don't ever dismiss them. So it's going to be a big loss for you guys. Losing him on the CSM is going to cripple Wormholer's representation for a couple years, probably.
So,
well, I don't know about that. We got some good candidates coming up that I would trust as much as I trust Newman.
It doesn't matter. Like the whole first year, like you can ask any CSM, the first year is lost. Like just figuring out how to work with CCP, how to communicate well, your first year's gone. You don't get anything out of them until the second.
Speaking of that, are you going to run for a third term?
We haven't finalized. It looks that way, but we're still talking internally, figuring out what we're going to do. There's several of us that need to talk. But it looks like we might return, but it's been a weird one. So like I said last time when I came back, there's some things that concern us. We don't really want to have turnover when we don't feel like the game is on the right track necessarily or on a track that we wholeheartedly support. So I don't think we want to churn, but we're talking.
Well, let's start there, actually. The game is not on the right track. I think that's the biggest takeaway from these CSM minutes. Now, that can mean one of two things as far as I'm concerned. One is that CCP is indeed off track and their pathway isn't acceptable. The other way of looking at it is that the CSM doesn't see it as acceptable. Are they the right representatives for the actual player base? So do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. As far as the CSM, so I think there are things that are not in EVE that are in other games that would not be compatible with how most people see EVE, right? Is the hardcore dystopian sandbox. Everyone interacting, things interlinked, like that living organism type of nature that we have with a single shard, with a large economy, with a concentrated player base. They're all sort of the same. I mean, we all have our little niches within the game, but we all sort of like that hardcore aspect. So anything that would be anti that would be, I think, perceived by most of the player base as a bad thing. And I think the CSM is well represented for all play styles. You don't see it in the minutes, which I'm a little disappointed about, but I was by far the largest advocate for HiSec in this one.
Wow.
Like far and away. Like I went to bat for HiSec on multiple issues. So I wish they would have made it in the notes and only like one thing did, but there was probably like 5 or 6 things it should have.
So here's a question about that. Do you think that it didn't make it into the minutes because CCP designated as important and therefore it had to be under NDA because they're actually going to do something about it? Or is it not in the minutes because it wasn't important and therefore just didn't get mentioned?
I would say the former.
Clearly, it's not in the minutes because it didn't happen. Because why would a goon person talk about HiSec? God.
There.
I was just listening to the dog. I was hoping he's going to follow up.
He agrees with everything I'm saying very adamantly.
Yeah, so that so you were the biggest. It's very funny to think of the Goon Swarm candidate, the one that they put forward that's going to get in anyway, despite anybody else's vote. When you have such a backlash against block candidates and how nullsec rules, to have their number one candidate be the biggest advocate for HiSec is kind of funny to me.
I think that this year has been a big journey of people discovering that the best way to have a healthy nullsec is to have a healthy HiSec.
I don't think anyone, like for me in particular, like my empire was HiSec for almost ever. Like my most characters were in HiSec. My most capital was in HiSec. It's only recently that shifted to null within the last 6 months since the reactions patch. But my whole empire was HiSec from like
Your
06 and on. Yeah, my personal empire.
But you finally actually made the move into Delve?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, everyone relies on HiSec in some way, though, at the same, like you can live in nullsec, you can live in wormholes, but you still have to do stuff in HiSec at some point. It's part of like that circle of life of Eve, too.
Well, that and the fact that why would you focus on one half of the sphere of the economy when you need both halves, right? You've got the arbitrage thing, what I think a lot of people start into. You've got the basketing effect through different regional areas of the economy. You have the economic flow of ISK and items back and forth that you all have to kind of balance. So if you're not in HiSec as a major nullsec player, then you are missing half the game.
Right. So again, back to this pathway. It looks like you guys were not impressed with basically what the strategy team was laying out as the way that Eve is going. You didn't see there was a lot of room for fixing things that were not quite done yet. Is that accurate?
There was definitely a lot of concern around a number of balance issues, whether we were getting a lot of what did they call them? Little things. Like we're big advocates of another little things patch. What was Incarna? So
Retribution.
Oh yeah, Retribution. So what we didn't like was some of the things presented to us. We had a visceral reaction, like the entire CSM, including Steve. Like that's when an option sucks. When like Steve is like, as a HiSecer, even I disagree. This is too risk averse. You know what I mean?
It's too risk averse. That's what the issue was.
Sort of. Like I'm using a general term so I don't break NDA, but. Think along those lines where it was something so unconscionable within the game that we all recoiled in horror.
Fundamentally un-Eve.
It's fundamentally un-Eve, and it wasn't even the purpose of the feature. It was just ancillary to how they implemented it. And we're like, what the fuck?
We're going to make instanced systems now.
Like, I can't go into what it was, and it wasn't one session. There was probably 3 of those, but 2 of them were in particular bad.
Would you say that CCP's strategy team doesn't understand what make Eve Eve?
That's what was weird. We probed into that, me in particular, very deeply to see if there was a communication problem between the upper and lower echelons of CCP. And that answer remains to be seen. Like, there's a lot of... I don't want to go too deep into the politics internal at CCP we're seeing. I don't think that's appropriate, but I don't feel good about that. I understand what's happening, and that's not good because it should be relatively clear if it's all straightforward.
Eric's not saying it, and this is just a guess because I'm not sure, but it looks like the lower echelon developers have a better idea of what Eve is than the higher echelon, and there's a disconnect between them. So the orders that they've been given on what to work on aren't even what the developers want to work on. It seems like they're having to work on stuff they don't really necessarily agree with. That's an oversimplification.
Let's go to the minutes. What the minutes say here, and Aerith can say whether or not he thinks this is true or not. But I mean, it starts off with CCP Hellbunny, who is oh god, I forget his freaking name now. The guy that came in from EAA, the guy from that came in from Electronic Arts back in 2013. The strategy team is a leadership team responsible for the direction of EVE development at any given time. They go through a bunch of things, but then he goes on to say that there's never a case of the strategy team saying, hey, you stop working on this. It's always a mix of what the devs want, what the community needs, and strategy then having input in that. He also says the dev teams have a built-in buffer for any edge case issues that may come up. He tries to clarify that the strategy team doesn't sit in an ivory tower dishing out commands, but rather the devs come to strategy with a list and are then asked by strategy, what do you want to do?
Right. That's very explicitly in the minutes that they're the ones that set the priority, but not necessarily give out the work and stuff like that. But I don't know. Go ahead.
I have a question about all this, which is that so CCP Siegel is on maternity leave. Now, when CCP Siegel took over as executive producer, she presented a 2-year roadmap, which I think, even though it ended up being the 3-year roadmap, I think that ended up doing a very successful job of keeping the player base in step with development and giving us faith that we were somewhere and we were going somewhere. That ended over a year ago. And then now CCP Siegel's on maternity leave. And it almost seems like with the executive producer out, there's a lot of confusion about what's going on, or there seems to be an increase in confusion now than there was before. Do you think that those two things are related at all, or am I just seeing something?
Well, she's back, and this was a problem at the last summit when she was still there.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Siegel also sits on the strategy team, does she not, as executive?
No, I wouldn't say that necessarily. So the direct question earlier was around the thing the doc you showed and everything. Do I believe that is true? I will believe that was said.
Okay.
So that reinforces the idea that the devs are working on stuff or not able to fix stuff they want to fix, and it's discouraging to them.
I think what I'm trying to determine is, do both sides truthfully and believe they're true, what they're saying? And I think that may be true. I think both sides actually believe what they're saying, but I think there's a disconnect between the two teams right now, and things are getting implemented in such a way that I can't believe devs would have done, barring some outside influence.
Well, and it's said that, that the strategy team is supposed to be taking feedback to, bringing it to the community. Do you feel like either the lower echelon developers or the strategy team are listening to the CSM and other community groups when you have these big summits? Do you feel like your voice was heard, and do you feel optimistic that they're going to listen?
Yes. I would say the fundamental problem they're having right now with the dev cycle is they're getting direction from the strategy team, they're implementing direction, and then they're coming to us and say, well, how do you like our implementation? It's kind of like, well, maybe you should have engaged us on the original premise, because we probably could have helped you more, but now that you're way down the track, this sucks, and this sucks.
Well, I guess it's hard to trust players with information that affects the balance of the game, especially when you have, by sheer political might, you have, people who run major economies, like yourself.
Well, it's not just that. Forget about that for a second. Forget about how good we are at the game itself.
Well, that's not
how good are we at bringing and retaining people into EVE? And we've shown we're better than anyone at it. So how about you ask us questions when it comes around player acquisition and retention? Beyond, hey, here's what we want to develop. Don't assume the individual dev knows how to attract players. That's not necessarily true. And I think they're coming to us far too late in the cycle to actually leverage some of the CSM. Now, I'm not trying to say that all the CSM would be good at this, but clearly some of us are in those organizations. And I think they're missing an opportunity.
Well, I think that's super interesting. You're right. I hadn't actually put it that way. Who's the best at bringing players in and retaining players? And I think you have to look at Goon Swarm and the Imperium and say, well, these guys have a lot of players. They have a lot of stability. Of course, winning attracts people too, but you still have done it and kept people together even when things were bad.
Well, either way, we win, right? That means we were the best at winning.
Well, the counter argument to that is twofold. One, that just means that the Imperium have been the most successful given the current circumstances. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Imperium should be determining the circumstances in the future, because maybe that would actually stagnate other people's ability to create counter methodologies, because ultimately EVE organizations are philosophies at war with each other. So in that same sort of sense, if you build it so that EVE literally caters to the Imperium philosophy, then that would only support the Imperium. But even beyond that, there's the perception of bias, right? If suddenly CCP's like, okay, well, the Imperium have done the best, so we're going to bring in the 6 top Imperium people to come and help us decide, then everybody else is going to just go, oh, well, the Imperium are the new Bob, and we're done.
First of all, we've been the best at retention now for 12 years, so it's not a short-term thing. And you wouldn't need to bring in 6. There's already 2 sitting there. So you don't have to change anything you're doing. You just have to ask better questions earlier in the cycle. And if you're worried about it leading to bias, okay, well, the proof's in the pudding. If we get more players into EVE, does anyone really care?
Well, okay, so maybe you can explain how sort of the Goon attraction and retention model could translate to other segments of space. I mean, is it just basically, hey, HiSec, why don't you guys all get into your own like HiSec Goon-sized organization that is really high-end with its organizational functions and all that kind of stuff? I mean, does it actually translate to the much more fragmented areas of space?
Let me give you an example. I can say this because we pitched it, and before we went to the summit, we knew we were going to pitch it, so I think that makes it okay. So it's something, it was my opinion. I was not alone in this. I think either someone else brought it up first and I backed them, or I brought it up and they backed me. I don't remember how it happened, but at least 2 other CSMs pitched for this. This was meant mostly for new players and HiSec, and it was a looking for group type option where it was just, I want to find other new players that want to make a corp, and let's start out in EVE all together as newbies, right? Like, maybe it wouldn't be very highly used, but it would be really cool just to have that looking for group type thing when it comes to corporations within EVE, right? Get people into a corporation where they have a human attachment to someone else in the game as quickly as you can, because that's what drives retention. And just a little thing like that.
Well, there's already a corp finder.
Yeah, but you don't want a corp finder. That's an established corporation. You want like 10 guys can turn on like looking for a corp or whatever. And when they find 10 other newbies that are all outside of a corp, they all go, okay, let's form our corp now. Like all newbies, day 1.
Well, all right. So the reason we're spending a lot of time on this is this is the major issue out of the minutes. You can read all the minutes and you can see what's coming. You can see that there's new designs for these ships, and 4K, EVE is on the way in a long time. That the structures that they're building are taking a long time and will. But really, what you want to get out of these notes is what's the direction of EVE? Where is it headed? How can I benefit from it? And that sort of thing, I imagine. So.
Did the observatories make it in the notes? They did, didn't they?
Yes, they did. That they won't be here for years, so people can please stop talking about this.
Everyone should be pissed about that, because that means a whole lot of other things probably aren't coming soon. Like, I don't think you're going to have any sense of delayed or no local until observatories are in. I can't see that happening.
They've straight up said that.
Yeah, so
it's still on the roadmap, but years away. Years multiple.
So you're not looking at a major shakeup of how the null economy or null functions at a base level for a very long time. So get used to the current mechanics, baby.
I mean, the other thing that was not mentioned anywhere in there was player-built stargates. That term, player-built stargates. Now, they did talk about things like jump bridges and obviously needing to replace the things that are currently left on pauses now, right? So, Sino jammers and Sino beacons and jump bridges. But the word player-built, the term player-built stargates was nowhere in there, and that has been this term that continues to be, bantered about out there, amongst the community because they heard the word in 2014.
I guess that's a good question. Without revealing your NDA at all, do you feel that you walked away with an idea of what they're going to do next? Like,
yeah.
Do you feel confident that you know what's going to come out in the next few months?
Yeah, we know.
that doesn't sound like you're happy about it.
I wouldn't say I'm happy or disappointed. Like, it's stuff that I understand the reasoning for doing and spending the development cycles on. I may not have necessarily agreed with their priority, but I do agree that it's some things worth doing.
Right.
Like, I think we're going to get a lot of small things that we all want. Like, I think that's coming. I think, we're going to get some changes that some of us like, some of us don't like. But in general, like, for example, it says in the notes, the bringing low-end moon goo to high sec. That came up at the summit. Like, I was the one that brought up, like, hey, R4s are jacked. We need some kind of solution. And CCP had a solution. So that's the kind of thing that it's a kind of quality of life thing for high sec. They'll be able to make a lot of money and own their little fiefdoms in high sec. So I think that's a good thing. I think a lot of high sec players will like that.
The reason why I asked that question was a bit leading, and it was based on the jump bridge question, which is that, like, could it be possible that CCP, like, it's not in the minutes because that's the heavily NDA'd stuff because that's what's coming up?
I think in some cases that's true. I don't know that that's necessarily true in the case of jump bridges / stargates.
Yeah,
like, I can't speak to why they redacted some things. Like, I don't know why. Some of them make sense. Like, oh, that was a very heated session. That whole session really isn't represented. But others are like, I figured they would release that one.
So the minutes themselves, like, you've only skimmed them, obviously, because you were there in those meetings. You need to read it. But when you did look at them, they're written in a completely different way. There seemed to be a lot more candid references to people, specific people, rather than the CSM as a whole, which is good because then you can see what people are saying. And there's a lot of, like, technical errors in it. Sometimes first names were left in there, stuff like that. What's your impression of the minutes overall?
Different. Like, they're so heavily redacted, it's hard to directly correlate them to previous minutes. But of course, they're going to change. It's Logibro now, not Logibro, but a GM that's doing them instead of Logibro doing them. And Logibro, that was kind of his whole job, and so he would spend more time smoothing them and grammaring them up and making sure there's no typos or revealing things. And he had more time to spend on the notes. Whereas this one, it's a GM that probably didn't have a ton of time to spend on it.
Yeah, and it's a big document. But it did seem like it seemed like there was more information in it, but what you're saying is, no, there was a lot of stuff that was left out.
Yeah, I would say it's the most heavily redacted of any summit I've been at.
Well,
except that you go back to those other minutes, and I can pretty much say that I think maybe the last 2 to 3 summit minutes have been just so bland that they weren't even worth talking about.
But at least you understood the topics being discussed. You don't even see that in these.
Is it because that they're rushing them out the door?
No, I think they're redacting them.
If you look at the minutes, and this is what's different about them, last time they would say this topic or something was discussed by the CCP, whatever. And
yeah, they would list the session, who was there, and then, it's all redacted, right? At least you knew that happened.
Okay. So the sessions that were redacted aren't even showing up as being talked about.
Yeah, I'll have to go double check all of them aren't, but I noticed some are not there. Like, what we discussed isn't even mentioned at all.
So there wasn't a wormhole section or a faction war section. That's true, right?
I'm thinking. I don't think we had sessions dedicated to those, but I don't remember exactly.
Okay, so because
I know faction warfare was extensively discussed at the summit.
But not in its own section.
Oh, really?
Yeah, faction warfare got a lot of airtime. Yeah.
Well, and you can see that in some of the sections, especially where they, were doing some of the voting and things along those lines. I mean, where the idea that there are issues with faction warfare was brought up, but it looked like it was sort of tabled as that's a really big project, and it's not on our radar at the moment.
Yeah. I don't want to characterize it sounds like a big update to faction warfare is coming. I'm not trying to set that impression, but it definitely was talked about around a lot of point issues and things like that nature.
Now, as far as this being redacted or not, over redacted or not, I mean, there appears to be disagreement on that, because the day that they came out, the judge said the community deserves as much of a redacted version of the summit minutes as possible. This time, you got to see some of the negative side rather than having it censored. I believe this is a good first step in CCP CSM player relations being more open and honest. So some people out there think that this was actually less redacted than in the past.
So I would caution you. What Judge is saying is absolutely true. That you're seeing any vitriol in the minutes at all is new. But I would say it's a very small portion of what occurred.
I think it has to do with what message you think is getting across. So I think that instead of it being redacted, he's saying it's not as sanitized.
Correct. Like it's definitely letting some of that through, where it would have been completely sanitized by Logibro, but you're still not seeing the vast majority of the things we're truly concerned about.
Oh, that's interesting, because in that way, it's not a good representation of CSM's push against CCP or advice or anything.
No, these are milquetoast notes. Like this CSM looks completely ineffectual if you read those notes, but there's a lot of things that we definitely changed at the summit.
And that's a good point. It does look like it kind of looks like you guys were commenting on some pretty petty stuff, as if you weren't sort, it was.
Yeah, well, all of that was petty.
Well, you say petty stuff, but one of the big themes that comes up through this is what appears to be apparent agreement broadly amongst the CSM that we need another Crucible type moment, that we need another fix the little things. We know that there are bigger things broken out there too, but if we can have more of the small things that need to be fixed, we want that before you go and fix the bigger stuff. And those may seem like petty things to each individual out there, but in aggregate, we can go back to what we believed were some of the underlying foundational issues that led to the Summer of Rage as being some of these smaller things that continue to linger.
I don't know about Summer Rage being the small things. They were existential things, and the things that we're talking about aren't in the notes are existential things. Like, point fix is fine. I'm all for that. We backed a lot of them. We presented a bunch of them. I think they'll make it in. Awesome. That helps the day-to-day EVE and quality of life. But there were existential threats to this game and the way we all love it that I think we were fending off this time.
Do you think there's a chance of losing that pen and paper crowd that likes strategy and competing with their mind? Basically likes to find ways of, subverting the enemy quietly. Do you think we're losing that crowd to, people who like Dota 2 or something?
I think that there is not necessarily we're losing them. I mean, we are, just because we're getting older and we have families and careers now. That's normal. Not everyone can be, middle-aged man-children, right? That's normal.
Takes a special talent.
It does, and it takes a special spouse. You know what I mean? But what I do worry about is that there's a recognition that you're not going to get many of those gamers, that type of gamer, back or acquire them, because they just are a small number of the total gaming population. And so my concern would be that the future of EVE would be directed at getting those Dota 2 type gamers. And that's just, ugh.
I'm going to go back and continue to reinforce the fact that I think that the way that EVE actually is not holding CC or EVE is back as much as how EVE is portrayed as to people outside of EVE, or how people remember it as, I should say.
It's a marketing problem.
Maybe it's just so. There's a lot of little things like I mean, this could be a whole nother discussion, but things like war decks. There's a couple of mechanics that make it so that it's very easy to come to certain conclusions about what EVE is that may or may not be actually true in your gameplay, and then leave or just be told about an idea of what EVE is that may or may not have anything to do with reality.
Well, y'all saw that Post-it picture, right? That Falcon put up.
Which one?
The one where he put up like the board with all the Post-its of the things we wanted to fix. We all had to, rank them.
Yes.
A long time ago, or has it been done again recently?
It was during the summit.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I saw it because PI and Faction Warfare were both very prominent.
So what Aerith is referring to is the quality of life list of things that they want to get fixed or iterated upon quickly, right?
Right. So one of them up there was Wardex, and I think you'll see that Wardex, like the photo shows, it had like 6 votes, and I was 5 of those 6 because I fundamentally believe that high sec Wardex should not impact someone without something in space. Like you should have something in space be Wardexable.
Thank you.
Like because I don't like we had this long missive come from some mercenary to like all the CSM members, and he's like, I think you guys should really talk to the people who do the Wardex so you really understand, you know, where we're coming from and you're not biased by people who are getting Wardecked. And it's like we're biased because we had a roundtable like a nominate did where the Wardeckers all convinced him these are the Wardeck Corps, that they were basically just griefing newbies. That they weren't phrasing it in terms like that, but when you distilled down what they were doing, they're picking on people that can't fight back because they have small penises. So let's get it nerfed.
I hosted that panel and it was insane. Like
That's amazing. So yeah, that was 7 votes. We'll go through that real quick. The QOL list, we'll call it, and that is quality of life changes that were requested by the CSM, were voted on 3 or 4 times until they distilled it to a list. And nullification came in first, and that is nullification meaning you can't be stopped by bubbles as you're transporting with Interceptor and couple other ships. Wardex was number 2 with actually the same amount of votes, 7 votes. Then you had faction war, and then you had fatigue, and then you have a dedicated balance team rounding out with 5 votes. So fatigue, balance.
So yeah, so you've got nullifications with 7 votes, Wardex with 7 votes, faction warfare with 6, fatigue with 5, and dedicated balance teams with 5. What isn't really talked about here is how many things are not on the top 5 list. So how many things you got eliminated?
Oh God, at least like 20 things or something.
Is this really a top 5 list, or is this just an ordering of 5 things?
So you have to understand how this occurred. So first we all had to it's like an agile scrum session, right? Everyone writes down as many things as they want to bring onto the board, right? So we all write down 5 or 6 things, maybe more. We put them on the board. And then you got to see how many people overlap. And then you distill those down and you throw away basically anything that doesn't overlap. You just stack rank it really low. But all the things that overlap get ranked near the top. And then you all vote on that. You have 2 rounds of voting essentially. Vote down and then voting. So out of each get 3 votes each get that board. I use 5 of
McLeod.
Twitch chat is saying we got jammed.
All right, so I got to go over that again.
All right, go ahead and just pick up where you left off, Aerith.
Are we streaming again?
Yeah.
All right, so anyway, this is the Agile Scrum method where you basically all write down as many things as you can on Post-it notes. You put them on the Agile board. You then all vote, like anything that's represented by more than 1 CSM. So this is independently, we wrote these down. So if 5 of us wrote the same thing down, that thing will be ranked pretty high. And then you vote again, and you put your votes on certain things. And then after that list is distilled, then you vote 1 more time. So you get 2 rounds, 3 votes each CSM. So 5 of my 6 went to Wardex. So if Wardex get nerfed, it was me.
And is this the first time this has happened, or you're making it sound like this is something that happens like every minute or every CSM?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have dev teams that report to me, and I have developers and things of that nature. So I'm used to it. Other CSM weren't. This is the first time it's happened to someone that I know of.
That's so. Oh, that's so interesting. War decks being a problem that you would pay attention to. I think that's counterintuitive, but there you go.
I believe it's detrimental to newbie retention. I think that smaller corps that people can get into and establish that first sort of connection to Eve and other people through gaming, it's very important. And if you just have war deckers griefing them right out of the game, it's just, you're not going to keep them. Like, we need to have a safer space. You can still gank them if you want, but we need to have a safer incubator for those new and small players that just want to play with their family or their family and friends. We should have a pretty safe place for them. If they throw something down in space, like they own a moon, they own a Poco, something of that nature, fine, they're fair game. But until that day, they shouldn't be war deckable.
The real problem for me comes from the fact that this makes it so that the only good strategy for a high set corp is to hide. Because if you get found, you get war decked forever. So what that means is that exactly what Aerith was saying earlier about how there needs to be more, like, hey, let's get a bunch of noobs together to form a group. You can't actually do that, because the higher your signal goes, the more chance that somebody's just going to wreck whatever it is that you're trying to do. I've witnessed a lot of people try to put together something decent in high sec for people, including my own team. And it's just every single time if you try to advertise, if you try to do anything, people know about it, and then people try to ruin it.
Yeah, I'll agree. When I first started playing this game, that's what I did. I found a small group of also newbies. We started a small mining corp in high sec, and all we wanted to do is just like kind of fly around and explore this crazy game. And then we got war decked, and we couldn't do anything. There were only like 5 of us, and we didn't know how to PvP, and it like shut our entire corp down for weeks, and it was really unfortunate.
And when that happens, people quit.
Now, that being said, people do quit, but that also is an initiator, right? Like, I've known people that were in high sec corps and then they got war decked, and then because they couldn't do anything with it, you basically have the choice. You can either quit or you can take the next step. Some people will take the next step, but a lot of other people will quit. That's why I like the idea that Aerith was saying, and that I've been advocating for over a year, which is that once you've put something in space, that is you putting, your phallus on the table, as it were. That's you saying, I'm playing with the big boys now. If you wanna live in stations and pay the huge taxes and just basically live the meager life of the underling, then that's fine. But as soon as you want to be a big boy, then other people are going to be able to hit you.
Right. So, yeah, we can get into a war decking discussion on a whole different show and go deep into it. I totally agree. I think we all agree, because we're all experienced players, that you want to have retention in EVE, because the more people are in space, the more it feels like an actual virtual world. For other people that just like combat, there are more targets. There's just a benefit to have more people playing on these servers that can handle a lot of people if they're spread apart. So that's a no-brainer. You want to retain people. Do we want, and here's the question, do we want new players, or do we want to bring back old players, or both?
Well, you want both. I mean, you want both, right? But you get down to an idea of what exactly drives retention on either one of those ends, right? I mean, it would be great if we can continue to retain people who are already established players of this game, who have an investment into the game, who have an investment in multiple subscriptions across this game, let's call it, right? Because that shows an ongoing health of the game. The new player experience and trying to retain new people coming into this very long in the tooth game is a separate issue. But if you can't maintain ongoing health at the upper end of existing subscribers, I don't know what you really think you're going to be able to do at the lower end in something that we know is a very low retention environment.
I think that the answer is a lot simpler than it makes out to be, because there's enough things, like, there's a lot of things in EVE that's just bad or old and kind of archaic. And so a lot of ex-players are ex-players because they came in, were interested, but then were frustrated by various mechanics, or fell out of love with things like missions and PI and these just general day-to-day things that make EVE probably less enjoyable than it needs to be. So in that same sort of sense, making things better so that people get retained will also make the people who quit because those things suck maybe look back at it.
Right.
And I just want to mention here because faction warfare, got brought up, war decks got brought up, and these were apparently part of the five, the official top five list after discussion, right? Nullification, war decks, faction warfare, fatigue, dedicated balance team. They then had them go in and talk about, well, how big are these, big are these things, right? Nullification, small. War decks, large. Faction warfare, medium to large, although Manborn said that would be extra large, actually. Fatigue, small. Dedicated balance team, small. And the final sentence of that particular thing is the CSM would be happy with scrapping the larger suggestions for more small ones. So pretty much right there, okay, even though we just spent a whole lot of time talking about faction warfare and war decks, right? Those are big. And big to the point where the CSM would be happy with, oh, you know what, we think they're important, but give us more of the small ones.
Well, to be clear, what they're saying on the size is rewriting that system. Rewriting war decks should be very large, but just restricting it to the corpse isn't necessarily large. We don't know yet. They hadn't done any investigation.
So another easy win, according to CSM CCP, was nullification.
So it's basically just like one stat, I think, that made him believe so much in nullification. I don't necessarily agree that stat was super important, but I understand why it was to CCP. So that's what's been keeping nullification in, because the CSM has been unanimous multiple summits in a row that nullification is just cancer. At least the way it's in the availability of it today, like on PvP ships like Inties, it's just toxic. And I think it would be kind of cool to where it's actually dangerous to fly into somebody else's space for once.
Yeah, so it used to be, for people who've come lately, you didn't go into nullsec because you could travel around a few systems, but eventually you'd come across a gate camp, and they would be sitting there like they're camping, and as soon as you come in, you'd probably get killed if you weren't in the right ship at that point. And the right ship then might still get you killed, because all you could do is essentially turn invisible and try to fly away, but they might kill you before you could do that. With nullification, there's a certain ship or a couple ships that you can use to fly through these things without any hindrance at all, which means that you can become a space tourist in nullsec, which is kind of cool for somebody who's curious, but it's also not a good idea for other reasons.
Well, I think that we're also unanimous in one thing. We don't mind if shuttles get nullification, as long as you can't be nullified in a combat-capable ship.
I think that,
or instead of shuttles, what about covops or something like that? Something that allows you to fit the ship and therefore not just be an insta target for any smart bombing gate camp or something like that.
Well, that. Like I don't care if we keep the ability to have taxis in Eve. That's fine. That's sort of a quality of life thing. Whatever. We just don't want like Fozzie Claws to still be a thing, or just to where you can have a 20-man gate camp and everything you see for the hour is just going to fly by you, whether it's a yacht or, in the T3s when they were super hot, the NTs. It's just all you see for an hour is just people just warping past you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Ash?
I was just going to say that, so this whole thing started with the T3s, right? Because the idea is that T3 is supposed to be such a high technology that it's supposed to be above and beyond everything that we currently have. And so in that sense, it kind of made sense. But then when they introduced it to Inties, it became much more commonplace. I didn't ever hear problems about nullifications being this huge broken thing when it was only on T3s. And I think that T3s are expensive enough and specialized equipment enough, and the choice to make them nullified is a sacrifice. So in that way, T3s got well balanced when it came to nullifications. And I think that when it came to Inties, it was more like, what exciting thing can we do to Inties to make them interesting? And it was a decent enough idea, but it's obviously caused a lot of damage.
Well, it was nullification.
Or secondary and tertiary effects.
Right. It wasn't just that they were nullified. It was you can go nullified in sub 2. That's what made NC so toxic, where only the Tengu could do it as a T3, and you had to be like hilariously fit. So that's really, those two things mean you are uncatchable.
Right. And as far as the covops thing, I just want to throw in there that I don't think any given ship should have more than one fancy detail to get out, right? Like the good example is the mining ships. Each mining ship have kind of their own trick. One is stabbed, the other can cloak and warp, and the other can move quickly while cloaked, I think.
Yeah, and I was just trying to, off the top of my head, just just say a ship that had some fitting capability to it, right? Because I think that one of the things that they've been trying to do here is they want there to be freedom of movement out there, and not necessarily freedom of movement, to where somebody's getting raped at every possibility, right? So therefore, you need a bit of fitting on these things, but you don't want it to necessarily be offensive capable either. So. I'm not sure which ship which ship class that would be. Maybe it needs to be a different variant of the shuttle or something like that. But shuttles are pretty flimsy. If that's the case, then why not just make it pods?
Yeah.
I think they did a good job with the way they treat nullification with the yachts. Like when those came out, and you could put a Higgs rig on a yacht, and you could roll wormholes, interdiction nullified, and no one could stop you, and it was just nuts. And they made it so that when you equip a Higgs rig, it's no longer nullified. And something like that, like not exactly the same exact thing for NTs, but something where you equip them a certain way and it gets rid of the nullification, I could see working.
CCP likes the extra modules, so give NTs a mid-slot module that makes it so you can't activate a prop mod, but it makes you nullified.
Okay, so another thing that was voted on was fatigue, and I think what was astounding here, I wouldn't call it astounding because we all know it, is there's no easy answers. Now maybe there was some magic bullet that was concocted between CSM and CCP, but how would you characterize those discussions, Aerith?
I'm trying to think how much of this would be NDA and not. I would say productive.
So that's nice and vague. Well, that's good, though, because it kind of seemed like, at least the notes represented, that there wasn't much progress made there, except that everybody agreed that it's a problem and nobody's really happy with it because it didn't have the intended results. And I do know at least a few people, veteran players, that left after fatigue.
Well, I would say, what have they talked about? So didn't they release something recently?
On fatigue specifically?
Yeah.
I saw people talking about it, but I never saw anything from CCP. Like I saw Reddit posts where they're talking about possibly lowering fatigue for jump bridges, but I never saw it initiate from anything.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm referring to. I know there was like a CCP dev post somewhere. Not like a blog or anything, just like a post on some forum or something.
Before the minutes, Fozzie did come on the show and say they weren't happy with the way it was working and that they wanted to change it, but they were looking at ways of changing it, and that was as far as.
Yeah, we definitely. I will say, I think I can say it was discussed extensively at the summit.
Okay. And I guess we can say there was progress made, right?
I would definitely say it's productive. Yeah, I think CCP recognized that there's issues in that area.
Okay.
Now, it should be noted, yes, in there, CCP Fozzie asks if the consensus is that they do not want to go back to the power projection days. The CSM confirmed.
Yeah, like I don't think anyone's looking to go back to no fatigue. Like I don't think complete removal as a mechanic is probably. I think it would be fun. Like I think just seeing the data with Aegisov, because I think I'm in the notes saying that I think Aegisov really limited how much you can project, at least for long periods of time. It'd be one thing to project for a day or two, but it'd be a whole nother ballgame now to project for weeks. Because every time you do, your space is going to burn. And this isn't unique to us, it's unique to anyone. You need your supers back home, your titans back home, your capitals to some extent. You could probably still project with capitals fairly well because everyone's got stockpiles. However, I do feel like the game's in a state right now where fatigue is just oppressive and it's tuned far higher than it needs to be.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between talking about limiting power projection, right, and fatigue as the mechanic for doing that. I mean, there are other ways of doing it where we don't get into this convoluted nature of fatigue and sort of what things like the blue timer represents.
Yeah, like I definitely think that CCP recognizes there's issues around how it's hard to understand multiple timers, that kind of thing. They always seem to be real sensitive to how players can understand information within the client. Far more sensitive to that than we are, I guess, as players. Probably because you got to think of the new guy, right? So I think they're thinking along those lines.
Kaskora, for wormholers, this is not an issue that really affects you guys, is it?
No, it really doesn't. I mean, all of our caps are in space in our home for the most part. So if we ever need to move them out, It's just a matter of a couple jumps. And if we need to bring more caps in, we could just wait for a connection that suits us, jump right there, and then come into the wormhole. So it really doesn't affect us that much at all. It's not even an issue I really pay attention to, honestly.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? You think it's the whole world, and then you look at a different sector and they're not affected by it at all.
Well, that's, the nature of wormholes is that our entrances and exits always change. So if we need to get a cap from somewhere, we just roll our connections until we have one that suits us, and then there we go. So the location of the cap is not important. So being able to jump it to a designated area is just, it doesn't really matter.
Okay, well, another section that was, and I found this interesting, resource wars were very much dead.
Well,
I heard your criticism of it, that the rewards were tuned badly, and they admitted as such. The rewards weren't enticing older players to bring in newer players to protect them while they did this sort of thing. So the idea of group activity with mixed experienced players playing together just didn't occur.
Yeah, so we literally made a corporation with the express purpose of maximizing the value of resource wars. And within a month, we just abandoned it completely because it's not something, it's just there's enough pieces that aren't quite there yet.
Now, do you think they could have improved it just by working with loot tables or something, or do you think it's a lost cause? Because they seem to think it's a lost cause. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so that's my other big problem with CCP, which is that CCP has this really good tendency to come up with really cool ideas and then mess up the execution slightly and then decide that the idea is bad. And the God honest truth is that resource wars as kind of like a way to go in and do a thing and hang out with people. And it was fun. It was engaging. I had a lot of fun. I wanted to work up the stacks. If I hadn't have been dissuaded by the rewards and by a couple of the other details, then it absolutely could have been a big thing.
Well, that team is no longer working on it, so they're not going to iterate on it, it looks like. But they're not taking it out of the game right away, so they'll let it linger and see if a few other people use it before it actually gets pulled, if it gets pulled. But that was one of the things they talked about. Should CCP get rid of stuff that isn't being used? Aerith, is that a good characterization of what they were saying, or was there something else on the under or the subscript, I guess?
I think overall that is probably accurate. There was a lot of subcontext where we gave a lot of the feedback that the rewards were crap and that's why it sucked, but they don't seem to have an interest in giving better rewards, so I guess that feature's toast.
So that strikes me as really weird. Like, it seems like you put this thing in, it could work if you tune it right, but they don't want to tune it anymore.
My concern is that it always had an issue of scale, right? So if you have to go find other sites and other people are also running that site, the chances of you going 3 or 4 jumps just to get to a place that's just about to close is really, really high. And as you go up in the ranks, that kind of becomes more and more of a problem. So there already was some pretty fundamental problems that they just didn't have to deal with because the rewards didn't make them.
Yeah. Well, and it seemed like that was something that CSM was behind, right? Like if something doesn't work, don't leave it in. It'll just add complexity to all the other systems, so take it out.
It does seem to function still as like a tutorial, like the next part of the tutorial, but it's definitely something that you graduate out of quickly.
Dirk?
I have no problem with them, like, admitting that something either is generally unused or not meeting their expectations, and that they are no longer going to iterate on it. And if that's the case, fucking remove it from the game. Don't sit there and allow these things to pile up over time, which is kind of where they've gone. If something doesn't work or is not being used, admit it.
That does create a dangerous slope, though, because, I mean, I've been told that faction warfare doesn't work, and so that the only solution is to remove it. I've been told that the PI doesn't work, so the only solution is to remove it. But I think that those would be very critical, or that would be critical mistakes. I've been told that standings don't work. Attributes don't work. Let's just remove those. But these actually do things. Now, what they do might be broken or may not be maximizing their potential, but that's not the same thing as being less than valuable.
Saying you don't like the way something works or it could be better is a far cry different than they put something in there. Nobody's really utilizing it. It's not working out the way that they thought it was going to. They really don't have a solution to make it work better. Don't let it linger.
I would say in this particular case, resource wars could be removed pretty easily, especially since a lot of people didn't understand how it got brought in. And so a lot of people might just conceive it as an event. Sorry, Keepstar or Keepstar.
Oh, no, it's, I mean, I think it just talking about removing stuff that's been in existence for a long time. I mean, that's very different than throwing something new in, seeing how it works, and then removing it. I mean, maybe they should have just had a set end date in mind, and then if it succeeded, then keep it going. Maybe they need to look at it in that way, as opposed to like, we're going to keep this permanently. Oh, it didn't work, let's pull it. Instead, be like, we're going to try this for a little while, and then if it succeeds, then be like, okay, well, we'll do it again, and this time we're going to keep it.
Plenty of video games, including Valkyrie, use special events in order to test new mechanics or try new things or whatever. Heck, we even had the daily skill point thing where it was like kill a rat for 1,000 skill points or whatever. All these different examples.
Dailies.
Yeah, but all of these would have been really good examples for short run initiatives, right? And they have the funny thing is that they have all of this lore stuff already built in, right? And they even have the event system. So if they just tied it all together, then they could experiment and iterate with ideas. They could learn some things and actually build some decent long-term features, experimenting with the short-range event system to make it so that people don't become so emotionally invested in every single decision that CCP makes.
Event system, real quick. Does anyone else feel like they're getting too seasonal with the October Blood Raider thing and Christmas thing that they have now? And now they have pink ships and stuff like that. Are we going to see dancing ships near the Jita Hub kind of thing next?
Well, the next event is going to be the Guardian Gala, which is largely based off of Valentine's Day, which is why you're seeing those kind of Valentine's-y sort of skins. But also remember that the purple flower skins are going to be Nestor. The actual skins that will drop will be the Guardian Gala skins from last year, which are now renamed the Spirit skin and expanded. And that's the same thing that they did with the Winter line, right? So they took the Frost line skins and they renamed it. The Yule skins and renamed it. Same with the Guardian skins. And then the one after this is going to be the Hunt, which is going to be Garistus Easter, the Garistus Bunny theme. So, yeah, they definitely are.
Now, that being said, we talk about pink skins, right? Look, there's a whole slew of people out there that want pink skins for whatever reason that they want pink skins. Okay, we won't get into that. However, one of the things.
Don't hate.
No, I'm not hating because I'm going to bring up something that was in here about skins that really needs to friggin' happen because it's been talked about for so long, and that is things like Alliance skins. Okay, or Alliance uniform type things back when anybody cared what their avatar looked like, but.
Yes.
These are the types of things that for various organizations out there will rally around because it's something singularly identifiable to them, right? As much as, there's a segment out there that might want more pink skins and can't we get more pink? This is something I think that needs to happen sooner rather than later, over flamboyant skins.
I would argue that CCP is doing that, but they're just being super subtle about it. So the latest Minmatar skin, the bloody hand of whatever, is a reference to Urshikon.
I didn't.
Yeah. Maybe it's just a matter of they'll have their mass-produced ones that they're adding for these events, and then it's a lead up to the more customizable ones. You remember at Vegas, how they at one point at Vegas they showed this new skin thing where you could apply skins and move it around the ship so that it looked different depending on the angle. I think they were going to do it with the America skin or whatever.
Well, hold on. Let's be clear. What they demonstrated at Vegas and FanFest was their creation tools, right. Not what they were going to give to us. That is what they are using to create the skins. What they have shown is that they are interested in holograms, which are not part of the skin, but kind of attached to the ship in some way. The example would be the Caldari carrier skin that came out in celebration of some anniversary for the state, has big Caldari banners off of it. And from what I saw from the Vegas art panel, that's kind of the idea that they're going to have, is holographic kind of panels that appear on the ship.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. But still, I feel like people underestimate the value of cosmetics a lot of times. I mean, I personally would pay more for an Ember Sans skin. I totally would.
Okay, so the minutes for the CSM, you can check them out. They are 77 pages, or you can listen to the podcast that we'll put out after this. But there's a lot of stuff in there that hints at things. But as we've learned today from Aerith, they're heavily redacted with most of the meaningful things, even though they're written differently and they look a lot more informal. A lot of good information and heated sessions weren't even included. And that's it. I think, there's a couple highlights. The art team takes about 6 months to produce a ship, which is interesting to figure out how long that bottleneck is. There's a 64-bit client that they're slowly moving towards for Eve. 401k, sorry, not 401k. I'm thinking stock market. 4K Eve. Again, something off into the future. Maybe we'll get there someday. And if you think about it, that actually might be something that would be useful, because as technology for people's home computers and way of experiencing the internet are improving, a 4K Eve would be pretty sharp looking.
I remember a couple years ago, they wanted to do high-res graphics. There was actually a forum post on the general forums. It was extremely popular. It was extremely popular for like almost a year. And they wanted to create, put out the high-res version of all of the assets. But ultimately, if I remember correctly, they decided it was a combination of like extremely large systems like stations and now structures, cause a problem, but also that they had, bandwidth issues on CCP's side of like distributing that much data to everyone. And I remember that they said specifically that the kind of the way that they download the client was a blocker at the time, but that was part of the change to the launcher. So that way now you can kind of only download what you need, and you can check the box that allows you to download everything. So that feature was cited as one of the reasons why they didn't do the high res graphics the last time. And now it's fixed. So that's worth noting.
Still, it's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. So it is something that they're moving towards, but very slowly. Again, same with 64-bit client. We also know they'll never go back to a lot of different sounds that you can diminish or raise in volume. So they reduced that from something like 20 different sound effects that you could reduce or make louder down to like 5.
I do want to ask real fast. You said they're moving to a 64-bit client. Does that mean that the current client is 32-bit still?
I suppose it is. At least at the end, the minutes indicated there was one, every little thing they did was one step closer to 64-bit client, which makes me think they're on 32. Yeah.
Because that is a little concerning for Mac users, because starting in like June or July, High Sierra is no longer going to support 32-bit anything. So that's concerning for me.
Isn't it emulated now anyway? Like through
it uses Wine.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I know it's silly that I play Eve on a Mac sometimes, only sometimes. But it's definitely something I have to pay attention to, because I know that I've been waiting on upgrading.
I only play on Mac, and it is we are second-class citizens. Yes, we always have been.
I was gonna say, if you're worried, if you're wondering or hoping for CCP Mac support, oh boy.
I haven't hoped for CCP Mac support in a long time. I just don't want it to be completely broken. That's all I'm hoping for.
See, but that goes back to that, like, what I'm fearful of when we start just saying that features aren't worth fixing and therefore we're going to remove it. Like, we've already seen that in some other places, like localization, right? It's not worth it to support certain localization. Certain localization was too difficult and, got too many complaints. And so their response was to just remove the official support of that, or, remove even more of the support that they already had in order to make it so that they don't have to deal with it. So I'd be fearful of what happens if the Mac client becomes too difficult for them to support technically.
Yeah. Well, I think we've reached the end of the CSM minutes. I want to say thanks to... Oh, sorry. Do you want to go
Well,
on?
I just
Gareth
want
has
to
left us.
there were a couple of comments out there before related to CCP Ghost. There is a segment of the minute which is a sit down with CCP Ghost, where it basically starts off. He's been working on analyzing the usage of different features in Eve, and then requested a sit down with the CSM to get their insight into the numbers. If you're interested in what CCP Ghost has been doing since the last time anybody heard from him, which I think is when he broke his hands or something like that, there is a whole section in there where they talk about kind of some data driven things that he's been looking at.
Oh, Aerith is gone. I was going to ask him what picture did Ghost start of what part of his body did Ghost start the panel with?
That's probably good that he's gone.
I mean, there's also some discussion in there. If you're going to FanFest and kind of want to hear a little bit about maybe how things are changing or whatever, if you want to hear about how the judge wants security guards at FanFest to, I don't know, accept his advances more. I don't know what, something about they're gloomy or something like that. Whatever. No freeloading on this year's pub crawl. All kinds of things regarding FanFest and other events coming up along the way.
And some important changes to the CSM and how the election process is going to work.
Oh, that is one of the things we didn't discuss. It is actually a bit unrelated to the minutes, although it was released. It was released as part of the dev blog associated with the minutes. That the election is not going to be coming just yet. I mean, normally by this time of the year, we would already be knee deep in CSM election. That the election itself looks like it's being pushed to late spring, early summer, with an introduction of the approved candidates, I think, potentially being at FanFest, as opposed to announcement of who won by then. They're going to be shortening they're going to be lengthening the campaign period. But they are going to be shortening the actual amount of time that you have to vote down to, I believe it's a week.
Real quick, I want to ask the audience in chat, why don't you write if you would prefer no interviews or debates with prospective candidates, or if you want interviews, or if you want debates, or both. So those are 4 choices. Interviews, debates, both, or none. Let me know. And it is nice. I think that last year we had a problem where Cap Stable was going to do interviews because they've done it 2 years before that. And really nobody showed up except Noisy Gamer. So Noisy Gamer and I decided we were going to do interviews for Talking in Stations for all the candidates. And we did 28 interviews inside of 2 weeks, which was a lot. And then a couple of them actually didn't qualify to run for CSM because they didn't know they didn't file the right paperwork. So our interview actually was starting out with, make sure, as a reminder, you fill out the proper paperwork a certain way, because there was this easy way to forget that you didn't turn in the part 2 that you needed to, or something like that. So the point is that now they're gonna use FanFest. It looks like they'll use FanFest to say, by the way, we have this election. You're all hyped up. You're here. You're watching it on stream, or you're here. Go check out this election and vote. And that would be good. If it's a longer cycle, we would know who our official candidates are and really only have to interview the people who officially ran, and that would be good. So thanks for the feedback. We'll try to figure out if Talking in Stations covers anything this year for CSM. Right. Well, anything else you guys want to talk about in those minutes? Because if not, we'll wrap up the show as well. Okay. So that's it. We would do some thank yous. I think I saw Commander A's. Thanks very much. Incidentally, is running for CSM. Thanks for the donation, though. And we pretty much have covered the high-level stuff for Eve this week, including CSM minutes. And once again, I want to reiterate the big takeaways are CSM and CCP were on different pages on where the game is progressing. And it looks like the devs might actually agree with CSM, whereas the strategy team and the upper echelons of Eve may not understand what the priorities of the players are as represented by CSM, not actually what the priorities are in general, because who knows if CSM actually represents the players well. So, anything that you can't let go this week that happened, you guys? I guess this would be equivalent to a shout out.
Yeah, I promised I would give a shout out.
All right. Let's
Now, I want to give a special thank you to Contraband, who is the CEO of XMeta and the military commander of FedUp. I talk a lot about the various different people that make FedUp work, but Contra literally is the reason why FedUp still continues to roll. In spite of the fact, anytime I have real life or whatever, when we first were forming FedUp, I couldn't hold on to a military commander to save my life. And he came to me and said, I just want to tell people to go shoot people. And I was like, I think that we have an arrangement. And he has been amazing since then. He's led many, many campaigns. He's always seems to be one step ahead of everybody else. And thank you so much for everything you do for us.
Nice highlight. Real quick.
I want to go ahead and mention my meetup again, the Eve Retreat. It's going to be at the end of May. You can go to everetreat.com for more information. But if we get enough people signed up by March 1st, we'll actually rent out the entire venue. And so we'll have our own private resort for Eve shenanigans. So anyone interested, definitely look at March 1st being the date that you make sure to sign up for so you get good spots and we can get that venue reserved completely.
All right, cool. Thanks, Ventrilo. Thanks, Vault 1999. And again, Commander A's. And of course, anybody who contributes to our Patreon. We really appreciate the support. So that helps the show, upgrade equipment and stuff like that over time. And that's it, right? Yep. All right. Well, that's it. That is going to take us through Eve this week. We will see you next week on Talking in Stations.